Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about The Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. So to start off, my first star is the title, and this one's Little Thieves. It really plays a part in the story. Like, it tells you exactly why it's kind of called this. And that's not necessarily a thing that has to happen. It's just, it made it feel more coming full, coming full circle, well-rounded, kind of fulfilling the promise of, what this was about and what I expected to get out of it because of the title. So, full star. Cover, full star. It is a beautiful cover. It suits the target audience, the tone, and the theme of the story. And the only complaint I have about the cover is it's the kind of cover that you can see like smudges and like finger, like oil stuff, like it catches it very easily. And it's something that irritates me a lot. But other than that, full star. Format of the book, also well done, no complaints, which gives it a full star, but it also goes the extra mile, and it has like little illustrations in with each part, not even each part of the story, but like each background kind of section, it's really beautiful. There are colored versions online as well of the art. So again, full stars. Author, it feels kind of weird rating the authors, but all of these topics aren't just to kind of rate it, but also to talk about it. The author is an artist. She is, as far as I can tell, completely unproblematic. And she even did something really nice at this beginning that I want to see more of. I'm going to read you this little author's note she has. It says, "This is a story about many things, beautiful and ugly, painful and true. There are discussions of child abuse and neglect, navigating abusive environments, and trauma from a past attempted assault. For many of us, these are wounds, and I have tried to give them air here without tearing at the hard-won stitches. Still, I trust you to know your scars." So yeah, that's definitely a good sign for an author, especially an author writing about topics that this covers. Because yeah, I don't want to say triggered many times, but it definitely brought up some of my own stuff. And I kind of knew it was going to happen. But being able to like do that with the expectation and the safety of kind of having that warning is always a good idea. I know some people think it's pointless, but I don't care what those people think. No, I'm just kidding. Most of the time, those people don't experience enough of that stuff to kind of understand why people would think it's necessary. Like I said, she's an artist. She has a website, she has a Tumblr, and she has a Twitter. All will be linked down below. And there is also an interview I'll be linking where she kind of goes into why she wrote this book and what she kind of wanted this book to be about. I'm not going to get into it, but she fulfilled, all the stuff that she kind of wanted to do. And so that's why I gave it a full star for the author as well. Another reason why I kind of have it in there, but it's also not too big of a part, is because even if, especially like historical authors, have like problematic themes and opinions and like stuff that they kind of preach in their books, or have just got into these situations that are like really bad, it doesn't necessarily detract a lot from the story sometimes. Like sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. That's why it's like on a case-by-case basis, and that's why I kind of bring this up in my reviews about these books. So the target audience is the last star. It gets a full star there because everything that it wanted to target, young adult females, even people who like aren't necessarily a target audience, but more older and especially male, I would definitely say this is a good book for them as well, because it kind of could open their eyes to like a lot of situations girls either have gone through or fear going through. So I gave that a full star. And one thing I did notice when I was reading reviews about this book is a lot of the lesser star reviews is mostly due to a few plot pacing things, but the character herself and a few other characters as well, like their personal opinions of it. And from what I can tell, they don't seem to have the kind of background that would really allow you to connect with these characters that these people are telling. And also it's a personal opinion of maybe they only like to read about a certain type of hero, and that's not the anti-hero kind of person. But I just want to throw that in there quick in case I forgot about it later. It has enough to do with the target audience topic. So that was the surface analysis. Again, it'll change sometimes depending on the book. I don't answer all the questions I have listed, just try to get an idea of what I'm going to talk about. So personal analysis, again, everything is going to be getting a full star. This is where I really start to, talk about why I enjoyed the book and what my personal perspectives are that made me enjoy it. I'm just going to say kind of not everything she talked about in that little author's note has to do with me. And then also, it's not just Vania's experience I feel stuff from, it's also from other people's experiences. And so despite it not being a book that like changes my perspective or like questions my perspective on things, it gave me insight into somebody else's perspective, which is kind of, this kind of character who's more of a selfish, typically unlikable person. But like, I've learned to kind of understand and like people like her more. So that's what gives it a full star. And it did a very well job of kind of representing kind of my perspective and my experiences that I've had and dealing with it in, a way that is like true and also delicately shown. So expectations, fulfilled all my expectations. Got nothing else to say about that. So yeah, I definitely think it deserves the build-up and the hype, but also I don't think there's enough of it. I don't know why this book isn't as popular as some other, like, especially young adult female-led books. I don't understand why this one isn't shown as often. Like, I've read some of the ones that are like super popular. I don't get it. But anyway, connection. I felt connected to parts of pretty much every single character. And, the plot and the story itself. There was this stage in my youth where I kind of had to like choose if I was going to kind of become more like this person or become somebody else. And so I felt connected to kind of her whole storyline of kind of what I could have become. So that was interesting for me. Again, I will warn because expectations can ruin a book, and you may not feel connected to this character or to other people, and it might ruin the experience a bit or like hamper it, but it is definitely something to keep in mind that go into it thinking that you're going to get an insight into a new kind of person. You don't have to necessarily enjoy who this person is, but it gives you insight, like that's just something I'd recommend. If you don't think you're going to like the typical or the non-typical kind of heroine. And while I wouldn't say this is a defining point of my personality, it is a defining point of my bookshelf. Like, I will never get rid of it. It'll always be like a staple of my bookshelf for my young adult fantasy. And I'm actually gonna put it up there right now because it's kind of a heavy book and I'm tired of whatever I'm doing with it, waving it around. Okay, so for reflection, I think about it often. I look back on it fondly. Especially after reading some of the comments that were bad about it, like I was surprised kind of by how many bad comments there were. But again, they were mostly the same kind of stuff, and I reread it because I do like putting other people's opinions into helping form my own because I like having that more open-minded, like unbiased kind of opinions. And so I did reread it after reading those comments, and I still stand by my enjoyment of it and the fact that it just wasn't a book meant for them, but it's one that's meant for me. And I would recommend it to everyone, not just young women, young men too, even older people. It is a breath of fresh air for me. Like it was surprising how much. I don't know. I guess I was expecting it to not be as good. That's probably part of the reason why I enjoyed it so much, is because I did not expect a lot out of it, but I got way more than I expected. Like it was so good. Like because it is. I didn't think I would find a 5-star book so soon while doing this, but it's definitely one that I want to see a lot more of what goes on in there and other ones. Not like exact carbon copies, but just how it is dealt, how stuff is dealt with in a story. Moving on. I'm going on a tangent now. So enjoyment. Fully enjoyed it. Moving on because I want to get to the content part, and that was the last part. So content analysis, plot, pacing, and promise. It is one I had considered giving a half star, but what saved it is the fact that it wasn't meant to be a plot-driven story. It is meant to be a character-driven story. And so naturally, that plot is going to be on the back burner, and it is going to feel a bit more drawn out, and maybe even a bit like messier. But, that's kind of, to me, symbolic of how life really is. But if it was a plot-driven book, I would have given this a half star. Because, again, the plot's not at the forefront. It does get sometimes a little bit rushed and a little, again, a weird towards the ending. I don't know what it is about the ending, but there's something there. I'm just not going to waste too much time thinking about it. And then there are points where I can see where it's drawn out, but it did not hamper at all my experience with it because I like reading books that delve more into characters and relationships more so than just focusing on plot. Books that focus solely on plot and try to have the fastest paced plot ever, and they sacrifice everything else for the sake of the plot, I do not like. I hate it. So, yeah, he gets 1 star, even though I can see the arguments of why that was a detriment to the book. But this is my opinion. Okay, so writing style and structure. This is the main reason why I wanted to save this for its own video, because there's a lot to learn from it, or to at least keep in mind for your own writing if you are a writer. So I'm just going to list kind of what I have here. And it's not necessarily, all these things aren't you have to do in order for it to be a good book. It's just things that I noticed about the book. And again, you should kind of think about these kind of things as you're writing. Not your first draft. Your first draft should always be just, having fun writing. But once you get more serious about wanting to publish it, you do kind of need to have this stuff on the back burner. It was written in deep point of view, which naturally makes the prose more stylized and personable. There was no telling or showing problems, passive writing, or weird mind transitions, which can happen a lot, especially because we get the point of view from this unreliable narrator. And sometimes authors just want to show so bad what the other people are kind of thinking or feeling that it kind of gets omniscient out of nowhere. And that never happens here. We always get it through her filter, but we also still get shown what the other characters are thinking without kind of doing the mind jumping thing. She also doesn't ruin the scene or especially the emotions by using purple prose or too pretty a prose. Also, she doesn't describe things too in detail. I hate it when there's paragraphs upon paragraphs about just these little things that don't end up mattering. Sometimes I feel like, I might miss something because I did read this one book in middle school that there was this one little line that I ended up kind of skimming over because it was in the midst of all these other little minuscule transactions or descriptions that actually played a big part in the whole story. And it was an important piece. And so I'm always nervous I'm going to miss something whenever I kind of skim over it, or not even skim over. I don't even try to do it. I just kind of lose interest sometimes when it gets too in detail. And that didn't happen here. It worked for me 100%. Do I agree with people who say that maybe there could have been more? Sure, but it's a personal opinion, and it was enough for me. So, another thing to think about is the inciting incident happens within the first 50 pages. That's, again, this is not a hard rule, but especially for a book of this size, it is definitely something that you should really consider doing. At the most, 100 pages, but by then is when you're going to really start losing your reader's interest. I would even say sometimes, 25 pages is good, but as long as you kind of have interesting premise kind of building up to the inciting incident, that's what this one did. Again, it depends on the story, but that's just something to keep in mind. And then on adding to this, the villain is kind of alluded to throughout the first 100 pages before he comes in. So we already have the inciting incident happening, and then between that, there's another 50 pages before the villain even comes in, which some people, again, might not like, but the way it was dealt with, it worked for the story. And then another thing I took note of, the chapters are between 10 to 15 pages, which is a good length of chapters for especially this kind of story. And then another just interesting bit of information is that near the end, all of the chapters kind of get consistently below 10 pages. Because, at the end, all the stuff is happening, all this buildup is happening, and then everything's kind of happening quicker. So that's just something to keep in mind, that the length of your chapters can help make your story feel like it's going by faster. And part of what probably made it a bit drawn out is that in the middle, we had a few, it was consistently over 10 pages. So just, keep that in mind when you're writing a story. The length of the chapters might, if she shortened it up, it might have felt a bit jarring, but it also may have felt a bit better paced if she kind of shortened them all by a little bit. But again, it's a personal taste thing. And then my favorite part of the structure of the story are the backstory interludes, which are about a page to 3 pages long. I think one time it was 5 or 6 pages. Okay, so they made perfect sense with the structure, the theme, the story, and the character. So every kind of topic that should have been a determining factor of whether or not it worked. Even if it had 2 out of those 4 things, it would have been fine. But it met every single one of those requirements. And then one thing I noticed is, you start out with a backstory interlude of, once upon a time there was this girl who, all this stuff, her backstory that started off her whole story. Then we get another one about 50 pages in, another one about 50 or 100 pages after that. So they're pretty spread out until, this is the part I love the most, until they kind of reach the ending, the last third of the book, when the past is starting to catch up with the present. And so we kind of get more of these kind of backstories happening sooner between, there was this one where there was even, I think, a single chapter in between these backstory interludes that happened. But again, the way it worked, despite it kind of not being structured, it fit according to what the story needed to be. And so it still was structured perfectly. In order for you to kind of fully understand what I'm talking about, you'd probably have to read the book. But there is also one future interlude tale of once upon a time this kind of happened, and it's kind of building suspense for what is going to happen, kind of oh no, who's the one that's going to be this person, or might not survive this, and kind of like that. So it was used very well, and it was a technique that again, I'm probably going to end up not fully using, but inspiring kind of how I tackle, at least for one of my books, of how I'm going to introduce kind of a backstory. And then my final note about the structure and the style of the story is, this is a good example of when, despite having a very interesting cast who would probably have very interesting perspectives and points of view, it would have been detriment to the story if you had multiple points of view. Having Vanya being the only person who gets to narrate is important for this story. It would have been a different story. Again, it also would have been drawn out more, and the themes would have been a bit too convoluted. Having this set, this is what it is, because there's already a few other things that some people say there was too much of, it wasn't focused enough, and that would have just added to those problems. Whereas having this one person kind of saved it from being a completely wishy-washy story, whatever. It saved the story. If she tried doing it in the multiple points of view, it would not have been as good as it is, I think. Again, I'm only assuming because that's not what happened. And then characters, relations, and interactions. Full Star, it navigated the complexities of human relationships very well, as well as human nature and developing and learning from mistakes, and also having consequences, and everything about it did very well. Even the romance, there was kind of 2 primary romances. I really liked them, and I complain about romances a lot, but I definitely think it fit the story very well. It added to character development, to story depth. If it wasn't a character driven, it might have seemed to take away from the plot, but again, the point of the story was not the overarching plot, so it definitely worked. The characters did not feel like carbon copies of other characters. To me, there may be a few, other people are oh, I've seen this all the time, but for me, it was fine. And then even if there were characters that were very similar to it, I feel like it's flavored enough to be different. That it's not kind of the same like it's the same archetype, but it's not the exact same person, you know? So I'm excited for a sequel, but I don't think it needs one. I remember reading towards the end and kind of how these two characters' story ends. Like, oh, I did want more from that, but trying to turn it into a whole another story, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'll have to read it to fully make up my mind. But I think it's a story that just would have benefited from just, you know, having a collection of, you know, short stories or just point of view chapters, not solely because I'm a person who's interested in that kind of stuff. And yeah, I'm excited to see what she's gonna do, but I'm not getting my hopes up too much because again, because I didn't like her original series. I might get back to it for one of these videos. Not in a good way. I feel like it's gonna be bad. And usually I like unique, kind of strange like premises or world building, but I don't know. There's some things about that one that just rubbed me the wrong way. But you know, I might end up liking it. I'm gonna go back to it. But yeah, we'll see. Okay, so setting, lore, world building. It's essentially set in like this German foresty, dark fantasy kind of setting, which it really flavored the story very well. However, it wasn't very important to the overall story. That's not a bad thing. It's just something I want to point out is that we could have changed the setting to a lot of different things and still come out with the same kind of story. Like one thing, you know, it could be steampunk. It could even be modern. There would be a few tweaks needed, but overall, it would still be a solid story no matter where it took place. And I never found it unimmersive. We got enough about the politics, you know, like kind of like the lay of the land, the religion, what city life is like, for, you know, like for the poor people and for the rich people. So we got enough into it, and it was never unimmersive. So I gave it a full star. And then themes, social justice, and morals, full star. It never got too preachy. It handled all of the topics it covered very well. It was a really good way to showcase PTSD, how your childhood affects who you become later on in life, and why some people don't have the luxuries of even being a kind person because of how their life has been. Like again, you're a product of your environment. Yes, there's some nature involved with the nurture, but nurture tends to be a stronger aspect for many people, especially depending on, you know, the environment. But it deals with what young women go through or fear going through, and you know, the class divide between rich and poor, you know, people who have privileges that they aren't entirely aware of versus people who don't have those same privileges. It has a lot of that stuff going on. And so yeah, it was an all-around good book. It'll be hard to probably find one I enjoyed as much as this one. And that is really all I have to say about it. I might, you know, bring it up in other books, but as of today, this is all I got for you. So see you guys next time.